Thank you very much. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'd like to talk a little bit about my adventures in design. It's been an absolutely extraordinary journey to be here today. And I just want to share some of that. But first I want to thank David and Raul for inviting BC and I to be here. We've had an absolutely wonderful time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of design, sort of how I think about the world of design, and show some of the projects that we've been engaged in over time, and really talk about a transformation that happened in my own life, and I think in the life of design, in the life of what it means to be a designer. Because I think we are perhaps the most fortunate people in the history of humankind to be in this room with the capacity that we have to shape the world, to shape the future, and design the life that we want to live, and design the world that people can live in. So that's really what I want to focus on. In terms of context, this is what's actually going on. We are now at 7.6 billion, and you can see that line heading north. That is on its way to roughly 10 billion by 2050. And the implications of that are really profound. It means that everything matters. If we were about 1 billion people, which we were for most of history, less than 1 billion, we could behave how we like. It wouldn't matter, really. We could do whatever we wanted. It really wouldn't have any consequence. But at 7 billion and 8 billion and 9 billion and 10 billion, everything matters. And the way that we do things is really critical. And what it means is that practically everything that we do today will be redesigned during your lifetime. That we will change everything. And that's really what we're working on. The good news is that we won't be using the tools from the past. We won't be even using the tools from the present. This is the work of Ray Kurzweil, and he shows that by around 2025, we'll put the processing power of a human brain into your pocket for $1,000. For the price of an iPhone today, you'll have a human brain, and think about the processing capacity that means, accessible to you everywhere. And by not long after, around 2050, we'll put the human brains of the entire species in your pocket for about $1,000. That you'll have all human brains. The big challenges we have, we like to think of them as success problems. We don't have failure problems. The problems we have are because we succeeded. We have solved so many problems that we are now 7.6 billion. If we had failed more frequently, we would have fewer problems. But when you look at this chart, the red line shows population. All the other lines are environmental impact. And you can see how closely they track. That ultimately the real impact of our being on the planet is in the sheer quantity. And that's the most important fact of the 20th century. And we have one more context point to look at, which is what happened just a few days ago, that the IPCC said we have 12 years to avoid global disaster. 12 years to change everything, to change the way that we live on the planet in order to avoid absolute disaster. So the urgency of design, the urgency of the capacity to envision a future and systematically execute that vision couldn't be greater. This is really the urgency of the design world today. What we've been working on is design as a leadership method. Really thinking about design as a way to control where we're going. That we can actually predict the future by designing it. And that means that we need that ability to envision the future. And if you think about the capacity of graphic design especially, to make an image, to create an image of where we're going, I don't think we understand how powerful and valuable that is. We don't understand the power that we have, and we don't exercise that power nearly enough. But that ability to envision a future and step-by-step execute the vision is, for me, the kind of core, the core method of design. All design, no matter what the product is, has that in common. We are all making a future. Even the worst designer is imagining something in the future. That's what we do every day. The question is, are there principles to do that? So if that's a leadership method, in other words, the ability to envision things, are there principles that we can apply? Could we teach someone how to do it? Could we develop a methodology for 21st century design leadership? And the answer is yes, and it really came about in a kind of strange way. Not too long ago, I was invited to be a royal designer for industry in London as part of the RSA. It's a very prestigious thing, and it's a kind of long process, and they finally asked me to be one. And part of that, they sent a group of young leaders to Chicago, where we live, to meet with us. And I presented our work, like I will today. And at the end of it, they said, "Wow, we're really baffled by you. What kind of designer are you? You're designing carpets and cities and products and social movements and institutions and governments. What kind of design is that?" And I said, "Look, I'm a designer. That's what we do." And they said, "Well, how do you do it?" And I was kind of irritated with them, and I said, "You should have been paying attention, because I just showed you." And they said, no, you didn't show us. You showed us the results, but not the method. How do you do that? How can you? We think designers are defined by their product, that a graphic designer does graphic design and a product designer does products. But you're doing all these different things. What kind of designer are you? And I realized, BC and I realized we didn't actually have a good answer. I didn't know the answer to that question. I didn't know how we were able to do it. It just evolved over time. And so we sat down and we said, what? There must be, in 30 years of practice, there must be some principles that are allowing us to succeed, that are allowing us to consistently win in these kind of very difficult problems. And so we began the work. It took us about 2 years, and we ended with these 24 concepts, these 24 insights that are in all the work. And you can see that some of them are really, they're Copernican revolutions. They're seeing the world in a new way. I mean, if you think about, we're not separate from or above nature. We were, for most of history, we thought we were given nature, that it was ours to have dominion over, that we owned it, and that it was infinite, and we could use it up as we pleased. Now, through science, we know that, in fact, we are nature. We're almost identical to rats and bonobos. A bonobo, one of the great apes, is less than 1% different in their DNA than we are. And so the idea that we're somehow a special case is really not plausible. We just happen to be a very successful ape. That there are now 7.6 billion. And so these make you think about your business differently. They make you think about your work and your life and your role on the planet and your future in a very different way. And that's the way that we work. It's really through these kinds of ideas. And so what I want to do today is really look at some of these and how they apply in the work. But before that, I just want to take a moment to really marvel at the experience and the adventure of getting from there to here. I consider myself one of the most fortunate designers of the last half century. I was born in northern Canada, about 6 hours north of Toronto. 6 hours north of Toronto is really in the northern wilderness. This is actually my home. That's my home right there. And you can see my backyard is quite big. But you can see that this is the end of civilization. The next stop is Moscow. And that's where I grew up. I grew up on a farm. And during the winter months, we had, minus 40 Celsius for weeks on end, which meant that we couldn't get water into the house. We couldn't get running water. So my job as a young man was to go to the well, which was down in the valley right here. And I would go down in the valley with a snowmobile each day and fill up my barrels with water and deliver it to the house. And when I was growing up, I thought, I never heard the word design. We just didn't think that way. And when I went to college, and I went to the city for the first time, I just tried to forget all that. I thought that's not part of my life anymore. Now I'm an urban cat, and I'm going to have an urban life. And I realized over time that, in fact, that experience is really profoundly important to what I do, because I know what it means to go to the well and get water for your family, and how much water weighs. I know what it means to provide water for a family of 5, and do that every day in and day out. And I realize I share that with about 1 billion people. Still, on our planet, about 1 billion people don't have access to running water. And that empathy, that experience of actually understanding what an other experience is really central to design. What we really do every day is understand what other people are challenged by and the problems that they have and how to help solve those problems. I became a designer quite by accident. I love putting images and words together. I ended up getting a job at Pentagram in London and had a pretty amazing experience. But the one thing that I was really surprised by was that I wasn't working on things that I really loved. I felt like I was building a cage that I was going to be put into. And so I stopped that, and I created a company called Public Good with 2 partners. And the idea was very simple. We just wanted our work to be contributing to making the world a better place. It wasn't more sophisticated, politically or intellectually than that. But it was very controversial at the time. People told me to my face, "Bruce, you're crazy. What makes you think you can only do things that you love?" And I thought that was an insane idea. And I said, I don't care about you. I just am interested in me. I want to do the things that I think are good. And that became our concept of public good. And that remains our core idea. We want to use the power that we have to contribute to making the world a better place. And that's a complicated thing, more complicated than we ever imagined, but that's really what we do. My first love, as BC mentioned, was books. I really, when I discovered books and started making them, I just couldn't stop. This is the first book that I did. It's on the contemporary city. And it introduced this concept of pantheism. And pantheism is the idea that everything is filled with life, that everything has a kind of potential energy of life, and that energy could be released at any moment. It's like the entire surface of the universe is filled with possibility. And if you kind of touch it at the right place, that energy emerges and becomes manifest. And so we kind of made this object in that kind of spirit as if the thing actually became a city. The book was about the contemporary city. We didn't want to do an illustration of it. We wanted to do an experience of it. We wanted it to experience the city. And that's really become the core of the way that we work. I worked with that group of people called Zone Books for over 20 years, and we did about 100 projects or so. It was really an amazing experience. This is a book called Zone 6 Incorporations, and it introduced another important idea for me, and that is that the idea of a discrete entity is no longer valid. The idea that we can think of an object and design an object, it's not plausible in the universe. In other words, that thing actually embodies other things. So it's a tiny piece that contains all kinds of flows within it. Like if you look at the actual chemical energy of an object, it's really amazing. It's not at all what you think it is. It incorporates other flows. And it itself, as an object, is incorporated into bigger ecologies and flows. So the idea that we can actually design a discrete thing is a falsehood that has created many of the problems that we're now trying to fix. Right? So when we designed the car, we thought it was an object. In fact, it's an ecology. And now we're trying to fix the ecology that we created. And we're trying to fix the energy and matter and flow of information and products that actually the car represents. So that concept of incorporations is really central to the way that we think and work. Over the years, I've designed about 260 books, which has been one of the great pleasures and adventures of my life, because each one is an incredibly intimate collaboration. When you make a book, it's really like you're telling a story with someone, and making that story come to life is really a kind of critical part of that. Along the way, I studied and kind of met incredible people who really influenced me and became part of my kind of intellectual life. I have practically no education. And I went to college for about a year and a half, had a very rough time, and was fortunate enough to have the whole college experience in a year and a half. It had the desired effect. It kind of kicked me out into the world, and I got a job as a designer. And these are some of the people that really influenced that direction. That people like Georgi Kepes and Molinage and Marshall McLuhan really introduced whole new ways of thinking about design and what the potential of that might be in the way that we think and work. I became an author. Again, I never imagined myself being an author because when I read the things that I wrote, it didn't sound like what writers do. But I didn't realize at the time that when they wrote it, it didn't sound like that either, that they had editors. And they had iteration. They had ways of doing drafts over and over again. And as I began to learn that, I realized that I was an author. And I wrote a little text called The Incomplete Manifesto for Growth. And it was really about how do we sustain a creative life. I mean, it's not that difficult to be a hot designer for a season, for a time. But it's an altogether different thing to sustain a creative life over the long haul, over 50, 60, 70 years. That's an altogether different problem. And I was interested in trying to figure out how do we do that. And it had a kind of life of its own. It's been translated into many languages and kind of lives on its own. Over the years, I've done about a dozen books or so. These are 8 of the books that I've authored or co-authored. And I'll show you a little bit about those. What I realized in retrospect that it was really driven by research. I needed to understand what was happening around me in order to know where I could contribute the most. If I was going to do work and contribute in some way, I needed to understand how is the context changing so that I can do the right work. And that became a practice of what I call context projects, really mapping out the territory, mapping out what's going on around us and exterior to us so that we can really see where to contribute. So all of these projects really happened in that spirit. This was a book called Lifestyle, which was really about what I call the image economy. It's the world in which we all work. We work in a world of a voluptuous energy of images that is increasingly volatile and more challenging to succeed. So it was about that. This was about the future of Tokyo. It was a collaboration with Minoru Mori, an economist in Japan. I did a book with David Rockwell on spectacle, and with Rem Koolhaas on the culture of architecture. And this was, for me, one of the most important books that I've done. It's really about the reality of architecture, not the image of architecture. Because before this book, if you walked into a bookstore and looked at architecture books, you would swear that no one ever dies, no one has sex, no one is ever born, that that buildings exist independent of humans so that they can be pristine and perfect. The reality of architecture is quite different. It's really about what it takes to dig a hole in the ground and change the world. And that's really what the book was designed to try to capture. It wasn't about, sort of making this pristine image. It was about what are we actually doing. And one of the things that we did in the book was we introduced what we called world images. So imagine that the editorial flow of the book is happening along as it ought to. Every once in a while, we would simply insert an image that turned the book 90 degrees. And in this case, it's voting in the first elections in South Africa that was happening at the time. And it was really to say, look, you might be telling your story about your project, and all of a sudden, the whole world is changing. And now there's a new reality that you have to integrate into the way that you think and work. That work with people like Ram led to commissions to do projects much beyond graphic design and books. For instance, this was the first big project that I did with Ram. It was a library in the home of Microsoft. So imagine what's the future of the library in the home of Microsoft. That was our task. That was our problem to solve. And in that case, it wasn't about designing the building. It was designing the strategy. How are we thinking about the future of access to information when you could have infinite information in almost infinitesimally small space? So you can put all that library onto the head of a pin. Why do we need this big building? Well, there's a social program that we need to develop. This is a project that we did, a park in Toronto that was a 1,000-acre park. I worked with Frank Gehry. This is the first book that I did with Frank. It's a little book on his bentwood furniture. And that was how I started to work with Frank. He invited me because he wasn't happy with the publishing of his work. He felt it was too much about his style and not enough about the kind of spirit and energy and intelligence of the work. This is a book we did on Bilbao with Kosher van Bruggen. A really beautiful collaboration. And I worked with Frank on Walt Disney Concert Hall for 13 years to really bring that project to completion. And I worked with him also on a project for MIT called the Status Center. And this is an exhibit that we did at the Guggenheim. And it really shows the kind of process, the kind of iterative process that's at the heart of the design work. The most ambitious thing I think that I did with Frank was a project in Panama. It's called the Biomuseo. It's the world's first museum of biodiversity. And in this case, folks in Panama asked Frank to do a museum of biodiversity, and he said, "What is that?" And they said, "Well, we don't actually know. We're hoping that you will tell us." And Frank handed me the dossier and said, "You got to go to Panama." And so a few days later, I was on my way to Panama. And in this case, we worked from the inside out. So we worked from the mandate. What are we trying to do? How are we going to change the world? What's the mandate for the institution? What's the story? What's the narrative that comes out of that mandate? Then what's the experience of that narrative so that people can actually move through this institution and experience that? And it starts, in this case, with the panorama. And it's like we can put you into a glass box. So you walk in the middle of that box, and the box is like a box of cinema that surrounds you. And now we're going to take that box and you're going to move it up through the jungle, across Panama, up into the canopy, over the different terrains, the different ecotones that exist in Panama, down through the mangroves and into the ocean, and then back up to Panama City. And in that process, you're going to experience the kind of richness and beauty and understand what biodiversity means in this context. The next experience you have, it's not the next one, but one of the other experiences you have is called the Great Biotic Interchange. And it's what happened when Panama formed a link between North and South America. Before Panama, what you had is two island ecologies in North and South America, and one ocean ecology that was continuous. When Panama formed, it broke the ocean into two, and it joined the islands into one. And you had this incredible event called the Great Biotic Interchange, where thousands of life forms went north and went south, and you had this killing spree for 6 million years that is still going on. Right, so as the animals went north and south, in some cases they completely destroyed and eliminated species. Many species were lost in the process. And in some cases they found new places and flourished and evolved in new ways. And that's really still happening today. And you can see the site for the museum is an absolutely extraordinary place. It's the entrance to the Panama Canal. So when ships are, when the boats are going into the canal, this is what people see. And it encourages them to get off the boat and to check it out. I worked with Frank on a project for Barry Diller in New York. I worked with MoMA to move them into their new digs. I worked with the Jets and the Giants to make their new stadium and design the fan experience. Everything that the fan experiences was our project. And we developed a way of working that we called street to seat. It was, what is someone experiencing from the moment that they arrive to the moment that they're in their seat and back out again. And it was a building that was designed for the Jets, the green uniforms, but they shared it with the Giants. So the whole building had to change color on game day, which was itself a quite challenging technical thing. One of the most extreme things I've ever been involved in, BC mentioned it yesterday, is the design of Mecca. And if you had told me when I was going to the well to get water for my family that I would one day be designing the future of Mecca, I would have said, I think you're cracked. That's not going to happen. I don't think I'm going to do that. But that is, in fact, what happened. They came to me and said, look, we'd like you to design a 20-year plan for Mecca. And I said, look, it's Mecca. We should do a 1,000-year plan, because if we do a 20-year plan, we're going to base it on the car, and the car is just about over. And I checked. And it's just about done. So we'll design everything for a technology that's finished. If we do a 1,000-year plan, we can't possibly know. So we're going to open it up to new possibilities. And we're going to build an open platform that is designed for change. And that's really what we did. Now, during that time, during all that work, we saw something extraordinary happening. We saw that design was changing from form to content. I mean, when I first started, it was about, the heavy lifting was done. Now we're going to do the image. Right? We're going to choose colors, and we're going to make it look good. But what happened in that intervening years, when billions of devices were connected, we began to be able to see into things that we couldn't see before. And when we could see them, they started telling stories that were contrary to what the brand was or what the vision was. They were telling stories of terrible things happening behind the scenes, while the brand image was very beautiful. And the best example is Nike. Nike had the best branding in the world. Their image was incredible. But back of house, they were using child labor. And kids got in and they connected the dots, and they stripped billions of dollars out of Nike's brand in the space of a few weeks by making transparent what was previously opaque. Right? By making it visible, we could see what was actually happening. And what that meant for us was that we no longer have to design the image. We have to design what we do. We have to design everything we do to be true to who we are. And where there are compromises, we have to redesign them. Where there are failures, we have to redesign it. And that's really what we've been doing for the last 10 years or so. That meant that we were moving design from visual style to what we call enterprise design, really looking at the whole enterprise as a design project, that everything you do is telling a story. So turn the sound off and just look at what you do. If what you're doing isn't right, then you have to redesign it. And in fact, if you look at almost every company, every government, every organization, none of us are at the place where we need to be. None of us are really running sustainable organizations. And so it means that absolutely everything is going to be redesigned. Either happily or unhappily. So I fired myself. I had a company in Canada, and I said, you know what, this means I got to work on this. This is really much bigger than I ever imagined. So we sold the studio in Canada. We moved to Chicago, and we started the Massive Change Network to really do this work, to really think about how are we going to do this. So BC and I did that together, and it's been an absolutely extraordinary adventure. It's way more difficult than I ever imagined. What we have to do, how we have to convince people, how we find the expertise that we need, how we work together. It's very, very challenging. But we're really developing design as a leadership method. It's really that concept of developing a way of taking on some of our most challenging and thorny problems. And we're doing that by developing the principles, by saying, look, if we can teach people how to do this, our clients, our designers, our students, we can help them to see how to think in the new world and help to get us moving in the right direction. So I'm going to go through a few of those principles and projects that relate to them. So for me, this first one is in some ways the most important, because all else falls off of this. First, inspire. Design is leadership, lead by design. So that means that your job as a designer is not to do the work and hope that someone might be inspired. It's to inspire people. Right? That's your first job, not a side effect. Right? It's not something that you hope for. It's something that you say, okay, I'm going to take this as my core responsibility. I'm going to put inspiration at the core of everything that I do, so I better work to inspire people. I better figure out how that works. I better figure out what it takes to inspire people, and that's really what we're developing. The project that for me best exemplifies it is Massive Change, and the back cover says it best. It's not about the world of design. It's about the design of the world. It's about our capacity to shape the world. And the idea, as BC said yesterday, we live a designed life. You live in designed worlds. You practically never experience the natural world. Just watch over the next few days how many times you can open your eyes and only see the natural world. You'll see it's almost zero. When it is happening, you're probably in a place that we designed for you to do that. We've designed it so you can have that experience, but you're not actually in nature. You're in a designed interface with nature. So that's a reality of designing the world. We started a school to do it called the Institute Without Boundaries. We looked at what we call design economies, the regions of your life that are being transformed by design, in some cases being invented by design. But all of these economies, design economies, make up the world that you live in. That's how you navigate the world. The quality of that design is the quality of your life. Bad design, bad life. You see, again, over the next few days, just check and see. Every time you're having a bad time, it's bad design around you. It's producing that. Get on an airplane, and you will see what I mean. So we looked at, in each case, what's happening. What's actually, what are we committed to? We will create urban shelter for the entire world population. We're doing that. And what that means to meet the needs of 10 billion people, imagine today drawing a line around the world that bisects the planet so half the people live on one side and half on the other. We're going to build again one half of it. And so imagine by 2050, we're going to build half of the world again. That's what we're committed to doing. We look at the market economy, as BC said, it's not a natural space, it's a design space. The manufacturing economies, this is a car that is designed to come apart. It's for the disassembly line, in the way that the assembly line put it together. We looked at the image economy and evolution, that we're designing life. In the end, we realized we're actually redesigning wealth. What's so brilliant to me about our life and the work that we do is that we invent wealth out of nothing. Right? We sit at a table and we think of things and we create things and we produce wealth. And that's just, I think, one of the most magical things you could possibly experience. And what we're doing right now is radically changing the definition of wealth and thinking about a wealth of access, wealth of information, wealth of mobility, new ways of understanding wealth. So for me, that's the kind of first principle and the first project. I had to say it was a life changer. We studied very intensely a few hundred of the most innovative people in the world solving our toughest problems. So meeting them was, it was uplifting every day. It was every day meeting people who are doing the most difficult work for mankind. The next principle is think forever, design for perpetuity. Right? And this is an idea that we have to get to a new concept of how we live. And that is doing it in a way that we can do forever. And what we've been doing for the last several hundred years is drawing down our resources. We're drawing down the past. We're living off the past. If we're going to have a future, we have to live in a way that we can live in perpetuity. And that's really a new way of thinking about it. So we were commissioned to do a really extraordinary project for Coca-Cola to design their sustainability platform. So how do you take a million people in companies all over the world and many more millions around those people who collaborate and work with them and redesign that enterprise so it can go on in perpetuity? And so we begin with the idea that we're going to make sure that everything that we're doing is producing positive energy. And then we're going to capture all that energy and bring it back into one place so that we can leverage it to create new things. And that introduces a whole new language at Coca-Cola around living positively. And you can see we started work with Neville Isdell, and in this process worked with Muhtar Kent, the two CEOs during that time. And you can see from what they say how important they saw this work. It wasn't about a kind of advertising campaign. It was really core to what they were doing. And when we presented the work, one of the senior executives, the 7 people who run Coca-Cola globally, said, I think this should be our approach to CSR, corporate social responsibility. And Muhtar Kent said immediately, absolutely not. This is going to change the way that we do business for decades to come. It changes fundamentally what the operating system is of the enterprise. And it led to, I just want to show you one little project that came out of that process. It led to this collaboration with a company called Emeco. Emeco makes the chair on the left, the aluminum chair, and has made it for 50 years. And they collaborated with Coca-Cola to make a new material out of PET bottles. And we introduced this concept. First, let's make things that last. So instead of thinking of recycling, let's make things that we really love. Of course, you're going to make them so that we can recycle it if need be. But let's start by making things that we truly want to keep, that we really love. And that became a kind of core mantra for this business. They launched the chair, and you can see the little ticker. The ticker is turning over how many PET bottles we've already taken out of the landfill, because each chair takes 111 bottles out of the landfill. And so each chair saves 111 from the ocean, from the rivers, from the environment. And at the launch, they had already made, they had already converted 3.5 million. By now, it's up to, I think, nearly 100 million. So that's a concept of thinking forever. How do we get to perpetuity so that we can do the things that we love, not do them? I don't want to define sustainability negatively. I want to do those beautiful things, but I want to do them in a way that I can do forever. The next principle is always search for the worst. A lot of people in my studio say, Bruce, why don't we get work with Apple? Let's get some work for Apple. And I said, they really don't need me. Right? They're one of the best design companies in the world. I don't have a lot to offer them. But there are so many things that need talent and energy and intelligence. And the tougher the problem is, the bigger the opportunity. So for a designer like me, good is bad, bad is good, terrible is awesome. Right? I'm looking for the worst challenges I can get my hands on. And one day this letter arrived from the Minister of Education in Guatemala, and it explains that their search for a future for Guatemala had led them to our work, and could we come and help, work with them and help them to imagine a new future for Guatemala. And a few days later, we were on our way with our family to Guatemala, and we met this extraordinary group of people. And this is the woman who wrote the letter. She's the Minister of Education in Guatemala. And this is Emilio Mendez, one of the most beautiful people that I've ever encountered, ever worked with. And they explained that they had had 36 years of civil war. Right? So they lived through 36 years of civil war. And during that time, they had wiped out the ability to dream. They said, our children can't imagine a future. We ask them what they want to be when they grow up. They don't have an answer because they don't imagine growing up. Half of the country was under 15 years of age. And they said 36 years of the culture of death have wiped out our ability to dream. And we need you to help us do this. So the first day that we arrived, we went to see the vice president. And they introduced me. And they said, this is Bruce. And he's going to redesign Guatemala. And I said, hold on, guys. I never said anything like that. I'm not going to do that. And frankly, if anyone offers to do it, you should run away from them. Because the only people who are going to do it are Guatemalans. You're going to design it. I've got things that I can help you. I can accelerate your work. I can help you do it. But you're ultimately going to do it. And they said, well, we want you to change the name of the country then. And I said, why? Why do you want to change the name of the country? It's like, you guys really think big. And they said, well, the place was known as Guate. When the Spanish got here, they hated it, so they called it Guatemala. And they said, how would you like to wake up in the United States of bad place every day? And I said, wow, you really got a point. And so we added an extra A, and it became Guatemala. And, love her, love Guatemala. And so we designed a social movement. We worked with them to launch the culture of life. And we had this extraordinary insight from Stuart Brand, who said, if you think things are bad and getting worse, you do what is natural. You close the border. Right? You hunker down. You lock the door. You keep people out. And you take what you can get while you can still get it. And he said, on the contrary, when people see that we're investing in the future, they want to be part of it. They come out. They come out of their house. They come into the community. They want to join. And so actually understanding what's going on is absolutely critical. That communicating what we're committed to, what we believe in. It's why I realized while I was here how important your work is, how important things like this are, to communicate to the world that this is what we're doing. This is what we're committed to. We're committed to beauty, to enhancing the world, to communicating the truth, that this is actually the core of what we're about. And that we're not about the kind of nonsense that you see on television, in the news every day. That's a marginal condition. The true reality of our time is that we are collaborating across languages and borders and boundaries and religions. We're collaborating in ways that you couldn't have imagined even 100 years ago. And that's a true reality. And that's what we did in Guatemala. And we said, look, we have a 3-part strategy. Show what's already happening, because people believe nothing is happening, when in fact there are thousands of organizations working every day to solve problems. Provide tools for change, give them ways of accelerating their work, and then finally connect the world. And when we said connect the world, they said, oh, you're going to bring people to help us. I said, no, we're going to bring you to help them, because you're solving the problems. Chicago has a gun violence problem, so do you. They need to learn from what you're doing to deal with that. So we launched an event in Guatemala City on the culture of life. And it was really about, we said, look, you can't just, have 36 years of the culture of death and just turn on the culture of life. It doesn't work that way. You have to build the culture of life. And we learned so much about our own culture, our own way of working. Like, we think of ourselves as entrepreneurs and independent. Well, we are independent, but we're standing on foundations that that have been built beneath us by people who gave their lives for our freedom. It was a really extraordinary piece of work. So you can see that the cultures of life include the culture of dreaming. Like, it's hard to imagine not having the ability to dream. That you could not have the ability to envision a future. And so you actually have to build that. They have to rebuild that. They can't just turn it on because so much of it was wiped out. So they did an absolutely extraordinary thing. They took over a traffic circle in the heart of Guatemala City. The whole thing was about beauty and joy and music and culture. It wasn't about heavy things. It was about life and all of its kind of pleasures. Our ambition was to get 1,000 people signed up as volunteers for the movement. We want 1,000 people to say, hey, I'm in. I'm going to put my name on the list. And this is in a place where people don't put their names on the list because black SUVs show up and you're never heard of again. So we thought if we can get 1,000, it'll be quite extraordinary. We ended up getting 20,000 people. It really was extraordinary. They started a movement that has now moved beyond Guatemala called the Guatemala movement. And it's been, for me, one of the most extraordinary projects that I've ever been involved in. So that for me is why, I hope you can see why we do this. Just to give you a sense, when we were there, we met with a woman who was working with a community where every single male was murdered. Right? Every single male of any age. Babies, grandfathers, and everything in between. And they were murdered by the village next to them. And the way that it worked, it was a geopolitical vice grip. So the rebels who were supported by the Soviet Union at the time, they would come in and drive out the military forces who were supported by the Americans. And when they drove out the military forces, they would punish anyone who was working with them. Anyone who cooperated with the military forces would be killed. And then 18 months later, they would do the same. The military people would drive out the rebels, and they would punish anyone who supported. So this woman was working with a community where during those 36 years that they had 200 massacres. Right? And the final one was every male. And then the peace was declared. And the way that they got the peace was they said, okay, as of this date, if it happened before this date, it's wartime. If it happens after this date, it's murder. And so those people had to go to the market with the people who killed everyone in their family. every male in their family. They went to church. They went to schools with people who had killed everyone in the family. Up until that point, they had not talked about it to one another. It was so traumatic. And so the ability to actually bring a design methodology to confront challenges of that complexity and importance is for me it's the most incredible thing I could hope for. Thank you. The next principle is to design the new normal. So much of what we do and what I imagine the people in this room want to do is to do special things. Like we love doing the exceptional thing, the beautiful new thing. But the design that we need to produce now is actually to solve the problems in a way that we can do it for everyone. And that means a very different problem. We've got to make it accessible to everyone. When in fact, what we love to do, I would imagine, we love to make it accessible to only the people that we really like. And, the cool people. And we want to just do that. This says we've got to go beyond that. We got to define the problem in a totally different way and really understand what it means to design prosperity for all. So this is an exhibition that we did last year, and it was in Toronto, and it had three components: context, design, and impact. The first is context. This is a collaboration with Paolo Pellegrin, a war photographer. He's documented the worst human behavior for the last 20 years everywhere in the world. And so when you walk into the show, into the exhibit, you only see these huge, stark, awful, black and white, beautiful images. And so you're immediately in this environment where all you see is how bad humans can be. When you walk through them, when you walk around them, you see what designers are doing to confront the challenges that you've just seen on those images. And we see people all over the world confronting the 17 UN Human Development Goals and designing solutions to those problems. So you see people like Zita Cobb in Canada. She is actually using design to redesign the ecology and the economy of the little island off of the coast of Canada where she grew up, called Fogo Island. And so she has built an inn using the most amazing design on this kind of incredible rough coastline. She started a fish company that's a sustainable fish company. If you fish sustainably, she will sell your fish for about 3 times what the regular price is, because she has figured out how to get those fish to market in the biggest cities in America. She came up with this incredible idea of an economic nutrition label. The idea that we're going to actually understand the economic nutrition of a product the way that we understand the nutrition of our food products. And we featured people like Bjarke Engels, who designed this incredible incinerator that's also a ski slope. And so suddenly, everyone wants an incinerator in their neighborhood because it includes, first of all, it's entirely sustainable. It doesn't puff out smoke; it puffs out steam, and it scrapes all the materials from the smoke before it puffs it out. And we looked at this work by Gunter Pauli to reinvent a brewery that was failing. So the typical brewery looks like this. You have all these inputs. You have one output, which is beer, and you have all this other stuff, which is waste. And you pay to get rid of it. Right? Some of it you just throw up into the environment. Some of it you pay to ship away. He came up with a whole new concept, which is that you can use all those waste outputs as inputs for new enterprise. So in this case, the brewery produces spent grain. The grain produces myoculture mushrooms, so he sells the mushrooms. The waste from that is used for worms. He sells the worms. And now you have a brewery that looks like this, where about a third of the revenue is non-beer and virtually no waste. Right? So you have almost no waste, more money, and less impact. And that's really the kind of new world. And then the third component of the exhibit was impact. And you can see that people all over the world are quantifying what's going on. They're really working to change how we're working and what we're doing. And I'm going to end with this slide because for me it really sums up what we're committed to. This is one of the projects that we included. It's by Max Roser called Our World in Data. And you can see what has happened over the last 200 years. This is what's really going on. This is why designers are important to the future. Because all of these transformations happened by designing solutions. So if you look at each one of these, poverty, education, literacy, democracy, vaccination, and infant mortality, they've been inversions. Right? So you have to really understand, like 200 years ago, 6 of 100 people were not living in extreme poverty. Only 6. So basically, they had a very, very exclusive club of royals and their courts. Those were the wealthy people. Everyone else was extremely poor. We've now inverted that diagram. I mean, look at what's happened, right? Like 6, it's now 10 living in extreme poverty. 90% are not. Now, we still have, radical difference between rich and poor. But nothing compared to that. Right? And this number, look at the line. The line continues down. The line continues up. 200 years ago, 17 had education. Now 14 do not. Right? 12 were able to read. Now 15 are not. This is the reality of our time. And I think for me, one of the most important things, if you go back to Stuart Brand's insight, one of the most important things for us to do is to communicate that this is happening, that we are doing this, we are accomplishing this, and that people need to join. And they need to not close their borders. They need to not reject people in crisis. They need to not deny possibility. Thank you.